The underworld has a reputation for being populated by sharp, ruthless, and untouchable masterminds. We've all seen the movies, the stoic bosses, the flawless heists, and the code of silence that keeps the FBI at bay. But that reputation is about to take a serious hit. Real life is rarely a Scorsese film, and sometimes the most feared gangsters in history make decisions so catastrophically stupid that even the authorities could not believe their luck. We are talking about fugitives busted by their own cooking shows, bosses caught because of a senior bus pass, and hitmen who literally signed their crime scenes. Every single one of these stories is real. Today, we are looking at 10 Mafia members who proved that while crime might pay, it doesn't always come with a high IQ. Number 1. The Pink Cadillac Parade, Jimmy Burke's crew. In December 1978, Jimmy Burke masterminded the infamous Lufthansa heist at JFK Airport, walking away with roughly $5.8 million in cash and jewelry, one of the largest robberies in American history. Jimmy was a veteran, and he gave his crew one very simple, non-negotiable rule. Lay low. Do not buy anything flashy. Do not draw attention. It seemed straightforward enough for men facing life in prison. However, the very next morning, his associates acted like they had just won the Powerball. They rolled into their blue-collar neighborhoods in brand-new, top-of-the-line Cadillacs, draped in expensive fur coats and flashing jewelry that would blind a passerby. One member reportedly bought a bright pink Cadillac. These were guys who, just 7 days prior, could barely afford a decent steak dinner. The FBI didn't need high-tech surveillance for this one. They just had to look for the neon pink car and the guys wearing mink coats in the middle of a New York winter. The spending spree was so absurd that it basically painted a giant neon arrow pointing directly at the heart of Burke's operation, leading to a bloodbath and the eventual collapse of the crew. Number 2. The Culinary Fugitive, Marc Ferrin-Claude Biart. Marc Ferrin-Claude Biart was a high-level fugitive linked to the 'Ndrangheta, one of Italy's most powerful and secretive global crime syndicates. He fled to the Dominican Republic and managed to vanish for years, living a quiet, anonymous life in the Caribbean. But Biart had a fatal weakness. He really loved Italian cooking. Feeling the itch for fame, he decided to launch his own YouTube cooking channel to show off his culinary skills with traditional Italian dishes. To his credit, he was careful enough to never show his face on camera, keeping the lens focused on the food. What he forgot, however, were his very distinctive, high-definition tattoos. Every time he rolled up his sleeves to knead dough or chop garlic, those unique ink markings were right there in 1080p for the world to see. Italian authorities, who had been studying his file for years, recognized the tattoos almost immediately. The man survived years on the run from international police, only to be undone by his desire to be a food influencer. Number 3. The Gambino Directory. John Gotti Jr., son of the infamous Teflon Don, was supposed to carry on his father's legacy as a sharp, untouchable boss of the Gambino family. Instead, he earned a reputation for being slightly less Teflon and a lot more paper trail. During a search of a property connected to Gotti Jr., FBI agents stumbled upon something extraordinary in the basement. It wasn't a stash of weapons or cash. It was a neatly typed, comprehensive list of made members of the Gambino crime family. The list included names, ranks, and even their financial contributions to the organization. It was essentially a full corporate organizational chart and membership directory for one of the most secretive criminal enterprises in history, folded up inside a small jewelry box. Imagine running a secret society built on a blood oath of silence, only to have the boss type up the entire roster and leave it in the basement for the feds. The FBI described it as finding a pirate's treasure map, where the pirate not only drew the map, but labeled every X with the person's social security number. Number 4. The Mustachioed Lady, Aldo Gionta.
Aldo Gionta was a Camorra boss from Naples who found himself in the middle of a massive police manhunt. His escape plan was to catch a boat to Malta and disappear forever. Knowing his face was on every wanted poster in Italy, he came up with what he likely thought was a foolproof disguise. He put on a floral dress, a woman's wig, and large sunglasses. The outfit itself was actually quite convincing from a distance. The problem was Aldo completely forgot to shave. He left his thick, unmistakably masculine, dark mustache fully visible under the wig. As he tried to board the ferry, police spotted the woman with the handlebar mustache almost instantly. One investigator later remarked that the disguise was so lazy it was almost insulting to the police department's intelligence. The Camorra has committed many terrifying acts, but sending a man in a sundress with a full mustache to evade the border patrol remains their most embarrassing logistical failure.
Number 5. The Wolf's Return Address. Ignacio Lupo. Ignacio Lupo, known as Lupo the Wolf, was one of the most feared and violent figures in early 20th century New York. He ran Black Hand extortion rackets that terrorized immigrants and was suspected of dozens of brutal murders. He was a man who understood fear, but he clearly didn't understand the postal service. Lupo decided to supplement his income with a counterfeiting operation. However, the fake bills he produced were so poorly printed, smudged ink, crooked cuts, and cheap paper, that children were reportedly using them as play money. But his true masterpiece of stupidity lay in his extortion letters. Lupo would send threatening notes to local businessmen demanding protection money, which was standard mob procedure. The catch? He included his actual return address on the envelopes, his real home address. The man who was feared as the Wolf was literally mailing the evidence of his crimes directly to his own doorstep, making the detective's job as easy as checking the mail. Number 6. The Lawyer Who Convicted Himself. Carmine the Snake Persico. Carmine Persico, the longtime boss of the Colombo crime family, made legal history during the 1986 Mafia commission trial. Persico was a ghost. The FBI had almost no surveillance photos or recordings of him, and prosecutors were struggling to prove he actually ran the family. All Persico had to do was sit quietly and let his expensive lawyers create reasonable doubt. Instead, Persico decided he was the smartest man in the room and chose to represent himself. He stood up in court and began cross-examining witnesses, but he couldn't help showing off. He started asking incredibly specific, detailed questions about the Colombo family's internal hierarchy and secret protocols, questions that only the person running the organization would know. With every brilliant question, he essentially confirmed for the jury that he was, in fact, the boss. He didn't just lose the case, he effectively prosecuted himself. He was sentenced to 100 years in prison, proving that a man who represents himself in court has a fool for a client and a mob boss for a lawyer. Number 8. The Golf Bag Sniper. Al Capone was arguably the most famous and dangerous gangster in American history. He built a multi-million-dollar empire, survived countless assassination attempts, and ran Chicago like a king. But in 1928, Capone's most dangerous enemy wasn't a rival gang, it was his own golf bag. While finishing a round of golf, Capone reached for his bag, which contained a loaded .45 caliber revolver he carried for protection against the very rivals he usually dominated. As he fumbled with the bag, the gun went off accidentally, shooting him through the leg. Some historical accounts suggest the bullet hit both legs and even his groin area. The untouchable crime lord had to be rushed to the hospital because he couldn't safely navigate a golf course. The press had a field day, mocking the man behind the St. Valentine's Day massacre for being taken down by his own pocket on the 18th hole. It remains one of the most humiliating injuries in the history of organized crime. Number 8. The Bribe Lost in Translation. Roberto Panunzi was nicknamed the Pablo Escobar of Europe.
He was a titan of the drug trade, moving massive shipments of cocaine between South America and Italy. In 1994, Colombian police finally cornered him in Medellin. Panunzi was a man who believed every person had a price, so he immediately attempted to solve the problem with a bribe. He reportedly offered the arresting officers $1 million in cash on the spot to let him walk. Under normal circumstances, that might have worked. However, Panunzi delivered his desperate offer in a thick, rural Calabrian Italian dialect that the Spanish-speaking Colombian officers could not understand at all. He was essentially screaming life-changing sums of money at people who thought he was just yelling insults in a foreign language. They ignored his offer, cuffed him, and dragged him to jail. Panunzi later complained to Italian authorities that the Colombians were rude, never realizing that his bribe failed simply because he forgot to bring a translator to his own arrest. Number 9. The Whispering Circle. Peter Gotti, brother of John Gotti, eventually took the reins of the Gambino family, but he lacked his brother's cunning. Peter became so paranoid about FBI microphones that he banned his crew from speaking at a normal volume. He ordered all his associates to communicate exclusively by whispering directly into each other's ears. The image was ridiculous. Groups of large, intimidating men in expensive suits huddling together and cupping their hands to whisper like children sharing secrets on a busy New York sidewalk. The FBI agents watching from surveillance vans didn't even need high-tech microphones. They just followed the most suspicious-looking huddle of men in the city. By watching who was whispering to whom, the feds were able to map out the entire Gambino hierarchy just by using their eyes. Peter's attempt at ultimate secrecy became a visual roadmap for the FBI.
Number 10. The Warehouse Yacht, the Camorra. The Camorra, the infamous Naples-based syndicate, once decided to modernize their smuggling operations by building a custom luxury yacht. This wasn't just any boat. It was a high-speed, full-sized vessel designed to move massive amounts of narcotics across the Mediterranean. The project was top secret, overseen by Guglielmo Giuliano, and built inside a massive, high-security warehouse to keep it hidden from the police. Construction took months of labor and millions of dollars. When the yacht was finally finished, gleaming, powerful, and ready for its maiden voyage, the crew prepared for the grand launch. It was then that they discovered a slight oversight. The yacht was several feet too wide to fit through the warehouse doors. No one had bothered to measure the exit at any point during the construction. The beautiful, multi-million-dollar smuggling vessel sat trapped inside its own building like a ship in a concrete bottle. Police eventually found it, just sitting there, a monument to organized crime's most embarrassing engineering failure. We often think of the Mafia as an invincible force of nature, but these stories remind us that they are just as prone to ego, laziness, and sheer stupidity as anyone else. From the man who thought a dress could hide a mustache to the boss who typed up his own most wanted list, the history of organized crime is paved with bad decisions. Sometimes the law doesn't need to be smart, it just needs to wait for the criminals to be dumb.